Today on the Family Answer Man, we're answering questions about family conflict over sociological differences from a biblical worldview on the Family Answer Man program. This is David Orgis here with Dr. Mark Crosby, the Family Answer Man himself. This time on the Family Answer Man is designed to answer questions commonly asked both in the counseling and church settings. Our goal is to answer general questions from a biblical worldview through the lens of our collective years of experience and education to help you, our listeners, have a stronger, healthier, and happier family. Now, we want to thank the incredible people at Winter's Air and Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats for underwriting today's show. Winter's Air is located in Denham Springs and serves the Denham Springs and surrounding areas. And Days Smokehouse is located at 35770 LA Highway 16, just north of Denham Springs. Now, this is a 30-minute show, and it is not a therapy session. It's not specific advice to your situation. Mental health is a very serious issue. Family dynamics can be and often are very complicated and dynamic. So, for in-depth answers to your questions, we want to encourage you to seek professional counsel specific to your unique circumstances. We hope that this episode of the Family Answer Man will encourage you and inspire you to make the changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family. Now, as I said, this is a 30-minute show, Dr. Mark, that we have, and we typically answer 2 questions on the show. Right. Sometimes we don't get to 2, and sometimes we have done 3. Right. So we wanted to encourage everyone to listen all the way through the show so that they get the full answers. Sometimes the way that we answer these questions, we have to unpack a lot of things first.
Correct.
So it's good for people to be able to hear the answers develop as we kind of set some groundwork and then answer a question.
Correct.
And then also for people to be able to listen all the way through the show and hear a second or possibly even third question is something that we're really hopeful that people will do because we do really and truly want people to have happier, healthier families.
Exactly. Yeah. And so again, this 30-minute program is designed to do just that, just to answer questions that maybe we all have at some point in life, questions that come, to our table, to our living room, questions that come maybe into our particular office, if you will, if you're a pastor or Sunday school teacher or business owner or whatever, that we all deal with and struggle with. Most of these questions, we'll argue, are fairly common, questions that are fairly common, meaning we all have them at some point in life, at some stage in life. And we all want to know what would be a way of handling or managing it differently than perhaps we've been doing. And so we just want to give you some information that may be helpful to kind of add to your arsenal in dealing with various conflicts, various issues, various problems that may come into your home and arise in your family.
That's right. And we've gotten really good feedback, some in person, some that have reached out digitally, some that have called, some that have written in.
Yes.
And so if somebody wants to get in touch with us, if you have a question or you just want to send feedback, you can email us at familyanswerman@loumc.org. We would love to hear from you, and especially if you have questions. We really enjoy being able to answer questions that are sent in that are specifically going to help the people that are listening, again, to have healthier, stronger, happier families.
Correct.
So today, we'll segue into our first question. The first question that was written in says, after a year of marriage, my wife and I don't agree on much. Not church, not hobbies, not where we spend the holidays. Life is pretty miserable. What can we do?
Wow, yeah. So unfortunately, we like to think of that first year of marriage as being the honeymoon stage, or those first 2 years of marriage where we're just excited about every aspect of our lives.
Wonderful. You wake up and birds are singing and there's rainbows, right?
And his breath or her breath does not smell bad at all when you first wake up. Everybody's happy, and so we like to think of that first year of marriage, the honeymoon season, as being just that, the most wonderful time of your marriage. Unfortunately, what we're discovering more and more is that people are realizing, he really does snore. She really does not know how to cook. He really doesn't help around the house. She really expects me to make 9 figures and not just 4 or 5. And so what begins to happen is there's a lot of disillusionment. There's a lot of disappointment. Expectations are not being met. And so all of this comes crashing down. And so after the first year or 2 of marriage, people go, oh my goodness, what have I done? So with that being said, I think we need to look at a couple of things that would be helpful. Number one, we need to recognize that when you get married, several new principles of life and living start to kick in. Meaning simply this, there are several areas now of compatibility that now have to come into effect when you're married. The first one is simply this. The first principle is that life is no longer about you. If you want life to be about you and only you, then don't get married, okay? If you want life to be about you and only you, then don't have children.
Right.
But the reality is the moment you get married and the moment you have children, life is no longer about you. Meaning simply this, once you get married, you must be willing to compromise. You must be willing to sacrifice. You must be willing to give and take, as my dad used to say. Because if not, what you're simply saying is that life is still about me. And that's not true. That's like saying, I want to jump into a pool, but I don't want to get wet. That's just not going to happen.
It's not going to work out. That's right.
So the reality is that you have to give and take. You have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to be willing to compromise. That is what marriage is about. Then also, choosing what is most important to you, meaning simply this. If it's not that important, don't make it a big deal. If it's not that big of an issue, don't make it into an issue. As the old saying goes, be willing to know what hill you want to die on. Because if not, if you die on every hill, you're going to die 1,000 deaths.
Die 1,000 deaths. And also, another old word of wisdom, you don't make mountains out of molehills.
Right. I mean, these are things that our grandmothers taught us. These are things we've heard all of our lives. But they really do become realities when you get married. And so the point simply is this. There's several aspects, really 6 major aspects of every marriage that makes a marriage strong and healthy. Knowing what those are and recognizing what those are and recognizing which one of these are strong in our life and which one of these are weak in our life is important. Because these 6 areas of marriage, again, I like to describe them as pilings or poles that hold up a house or home. And these 6 areas of marriage, if they stay strong, if they stay healthy, then your marriage, of course, will stay strong and healthy. But if they begin to weaken, they will begin to weaken the other aspects of your marriage as well. And so these 6 areas, first of all, I'll argue, is the area of finances. The thing is that everybody has a different philosophy on how to handle money, how to make money, how to manage money, how to save money, how to spend money. But in marriage, sometimes I hear this a lot. Well, this is my money, or these are your bills, or these are my bills, or this is my money, but these are your bills, or whatever it may be. And so the point simply is this: in marriage, it's not my money, it's our money.
Right.
These aren't your bills, these are our bills, because the two have become one. And somewhere along the line, we have forgotten that finances, again, are an important part of how we see our marriage. Because, again, even Jesus used finances as a way of identifying and expressing and looking at how people see life, how they see God, how they see, what's important. And so the reality is that finances say a lot about you.
Well, and just the terminology that you used, yours, mine, those terms put you at odds with each other versus ours, which is just the language right there puts you together.
Right. Yours and mine, that's roommate talk. Ours is marital talk. So this is our money. This is our home. These are our children. This is our TV or whatever. So finances are very important. So how you manage your finances as a married couple is important. In a lot of cases, you're going to have a spender, and in some cases, you'll have a saver that get married. If you have 2 savers, then you don't have a whole lot of things. If you have 2 spenders, you have too much, too many things, and not much in savings. So again, balancing each other out is very, very important. But the point simply is this: how do we manage our money? Whether you make $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year, the reality is managing your money is crucial. It's important if you're going to have money or if you want your money to work for you. Real quickly, we've talked about this before. There are 5 things you can do with your money. First and foremost, I'd argue this, and in this order, by the way. Number 1, you give to God. Give your money, your tithe, your 1%, your 10%, whatever it may be, your 90%, whatever it may be, but you give some to God. And the Word of God says in the New Testament that you pray about that, you look into that, you talk that over, and you come up with a figure or percentage, and you give to God. Second of all, you pay yourself. Many couples say are not saving. They're not putting money away for a rainy day. So again, pay yourself, again, a percentage, whether it's 10%, 20%, 1%, or an amount, $100 every month, whatever it may be, but save. Thirdly, you got to pay your bills. Fourthly, you pay down your debt. Again, debt, I believe, is part of one of the many, many reasons why so many couples fight and argue over finances. So work on getting out of debt. And then fifthly, enjoy some of it. So you pay God, you pay yourself, you pay your bills, you pay down your debt, and then you enjoy the rest. And if you do that, if you manage your money in that order, if you do it that way, many will argue you'll always have money, whether you make $50,000 a year or $500,000 a year. If you manage your money in those steps, you'll always have it.
And it's pretty simple. I mean, the formula that you talked about, I mean, you give to God first, pay yourself, pay your bills, pay down your debt, enjoy some of it. I mean, it's a fairly simple process, right, that I think, like you said, no matter where you are and where you fall on the spectrum, is something that we could all enact in our lives.
Now, and all five of those are important, because I know in my own life, there were times when we didn't save a whole lot. There's times in my life we didn't work on getting out of debt. There was times in my life when we wanted to enjoy more. There's times in my life, sad to say, we didn't give a whole lot to God. And so, but when we started giving to God, paying ourselves, paying our bills, paying down our debt, and enjoying the rest, then we began to manage our money, and our money began to work for us in a greater way. The second thing is, after finances, is intimacy. And there's various types of intimacy whenever I use that word. So making sure your finances are strong, but second of all, making sure that your intimate life is strong, meaning this. Personal intimacy is being open, transparent about yourself. There should be no secrets between husband and wife. No secrets. You should be open. You should be transparent. You should be honest. And the more honest and open you are, and the more transparent you are, and the more vulnerable you are, and the more your spouse gives you that grace, that love, that mercy, that connection, that no matter where you've been, what you've done, I'm still in love with you. I still care. I'm still here for you. That creates an attachment. But when we have something between us and our spouse, there's always going to be that wedge that begins to keep that intimacy from really connecting. Number two, relational intimacy, being open about what you need to feel loved. We talked about that a few weeks ago, that love language, and being able to share what that love language is in your life. Emotional intimacy, what bothers you, what excites you, what is valuable to you, what is important to you. And sometimes we're afraid to share our emotions for fear that they will not be respected or accepted. But when you can say, hey, that bothers me, or that excites me, or that is important to me, or that I really value that, and share that with your spouse, and they recognize that and respect that as well, that creates that emotional intimacy. And then, of course, there's physical intimacy. Able to express your emotions and love in a physical way, in a physically intimate way, is very, very powerful and very, very important. I mean, the Word of God says a lot about that. Not many pastors preach on that. They don't. The saddest or the loneliest, I should say, book of the Bible is the Song of Solomon.
Right.
And I rarely ever hear pastors preach a series out of the Song of Solomon. But with that being said, physical intimacy is powerful and it's important, and it's a part of the reason why God created marriage. And so the reality is that if you do not express love and emotions and understand that part of your marriage, then again, things begin to break down. So finances, intimacy is very important. Number three, your spiritual beliefs. Being on the same page theologically, being on the same page spiritually, not meaning you have to agree on every aspect or everything, but worshiping together is important. Sharing your beliefs together is important. Sharing, your views of God and church and the holidays, all those things, all those spiritual beliefs are important. The more compatible you are in those areas, the stronger your marriage is going to be. And one of the great problems that I see with so many couples is, I see a strong Christian girl or a strong Christian guy, marrying someone who's a non-believer, or maybe just not very deep in their faith. Mm-hmm. Maybe they became a Christian when they were 9 years old and baptized when they were 10, but they haven't been to church, since then, kind of thing. And what happens is that if one spouse has a very strong, deep belief and the other spouse doesn't, it's going to cause some controversy and some conflict. So making sure that you're at least on the same page and the same level to some degree in your spiritual walk, in your theological understanding of God's Word. And but most of all, going to the same church, worshiping together, praying together, ministering together. Mm-hmm. Work side by side as you hand out cups of soup at the soup kitchen, or as you teach the Sunday school class, or as you help with the children's choir, or whatever it may be. Number 4, children. How are we going to raise our children? How many children are we going to have?
Yeah, that's always a big one.
When do we start having children? Do we have children at all? Do we adopt? Do we not adopt? And so if you do not have a good understanding of how we're going to raise our children, when do we start having children, how many we have, that can be a stressful area of life. 5thly, boundaries. Boundaries with your exes and boundaries with your in-laws. Boundaries are powerful. In this day and time, there are a lot of people who do not set up boundaries with their exes. Maybe their ex-girlfriend, ex-boyfriend, ex-fiance, ex-wife, ex-husband. He or she still wants to call. He or she still wants to send you Facebook messages. He or she still wants to come by. He or she still wants to catch up. He or she still wants to have coffee. And if you don't have boundaries in those areas, it's going to be problematic. Or with your in-laws. Sometimes your in-laws will be demanding. They will come over without calling before. They will just drop in and want to sit for a while. Doesn't matter what you're doing at the time. So if you don't have boundaries with your exes and with your in-laws, that can be a problem as well. And number 6, ask yourself, what's our thing? What do we do during our free time? What do we do that we enjoy together? And do that as often as possible, whether it may be hiking or biking or camping or going to a bed and breakfast in various parts of the area. But just having some time that you enjoy with your spouse that you do together. The point is simply is this. The reason why this person, after 1 year of marriage, is really struggling is because perhaps, number 1, it sounds like they never talked about these things before marriage.
Right.
Number 2, it sounds like they need to talk about these things. They need to sit down and say, okay, where are we what areas are weak in our marriage, and what can we do to make them strong? And this will be a great candidate, so to speak, for marriage or couples therapy.
Right. So this is a question that he said, hey, 1 year in, you just listed 6 things that are really important to talk about before marriage, but it's also not too late.
It's never too late. As a matter of fact, I will argue this. I will argue that these 6 areas, I think, need to be discussed by every couple, no matter how far you're in your marriage. Maybe after the first year anniversary, couples need to sit down and say, okay, how are we doing financially? How are we doing with our intimacy? How are we doing with our spiritual walk? How are we doing with raising our children? How are we doing with our boundaries with our in-laws and exes? How are we doing with our free time? And or what do we do for fun? How come we don't have fun anymore? Maybe the conversation. And so every year, every 5 years, every 5th anniversary, 5, 10, 15, 20, and sit down and say, let's go over this checklist. I mean, when you go see a physician, your doctor is going to say, okay, let's look at your heart rate. Let's look at your cholesterol level. Let's look at your blood pressure. Let's look at these areas of your life. And they will determine just how healthy you are. And the reality is, depending on the other tests that you may be taking, the reality is that these things may change after a year or two. When you were, 18, your blood pressure may have been 120, over 80. But when you're 28, your blood pressure may be 150 over 100. Well, that's a problem. Okay. And so, but you have to get it checked every so often because your first year was good doesn't mean your 5th year is going well.
Well, that's a really good point. A lot of times you mentioned, hey, try out couples therapy. I think a lot of times we see therapy and people can often look at it as oh no, I have a major illness, I need to go to the doctor,
right,
versus, hey, I'm going to have a wellness checkup.
Right.
I go see my doctor every year on
right,
April Fool's,
right,
April 1st, I see my
right,
primary care.
There you go.
And just for an annual checkup
right,
to make sure that
right,
things are going well.
Right.
And I think that's a great analogy maybe
right,
that can maybe help us understand. Couples therapy can be that, and it doesn't
right,
have to mean
right,
that your marriage is completely falling
right,
apart.
Every physician, I will argue, that I've ever met, every oncologist especially, will tell you, the earlier we can find something, the better are the chances of us curing it, of us treating it, of us managing it, of us, helping you get past it. But when you wake up one day and you go see the doctor and they say, oh my goodness, this is stage 4, now you got a problem.
Yeah.
And so I would argue the same is true with marital help. when you realize and recognize, you know what, something's just not feeling right. Something's not going well. I've got some concerns. I've got some problems. I've got something just not, we're struggling in our spiritual walk. We're struggling with finding something fun to do. We're struggling with, how we're raising our kids or whatever it may be. It's okay then to find out, what can we do differently? What can we do to make things better so that we catch it in the early stages so that it doesn't become a full-blown problem. And the next thing you're saying is, I want out of this marriage.
Right. Yeah, I think that's some great advice, and definitely still looking into the wellness aspect of marriage and do some self-evaluation with those 6 questions.
Yeah.
I think is really important.
So those 6 boxes, real quickly, just kind of check them off one more time for the listeners. These are the 6 boxes you want to check off. Finances, again, number 1. Number 2, intimacy. Number 3, spirituality. Number 4, the raising of our children. Number 5, boundaries with in-laws and with exes. Number 6, what do we do for fun? What's our thing? What's our free time? What do we do that's fun?
There we go.
Okay.
Well, we're going to move on to our second question for the Family Answer Man today. The second question comes in, says, my college-age children said that because I disagree with them about certain lifestyles, practices, orientations, that I am hateful toward them and to their friends. How can I explain to them that I do not hate them?
Wow. And this is something that we're seeing more and more of. And it's sad that we've reached a place in our culture where just because we disagree with someone automatically means now that we hate them. If that were true, then every couple would hate each other because there's not a couple on the planet that agrees in every area. The list is endless. Every person would hate everybody because there's no 2 people who are going to agree on everything. So I think it's sad that we have to use the fact or say that the fact is, which is not, that just because we disagree means we hate. Now, with that being said, whenever I deal with this question, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had years ago. A person was basically saying this very same thing. How is it that, if you disagree with a certain lifestyle or certain philosophy, how is it that you hate them? And the reality is, I would say, I don't hate them. I just disagree. And you can disagree with someone without being disagreeable. But with that being said, I think sociologically, these are things we need to understand. The question, first of all, is this. We have to know what culture we live in. And here's what I mean by that. In a theonomous culture basically says, we go by what the law of God in our heart is, or what we call natural law. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And for years, our culture would do that. We knew that there were certain things that, hey, God has said is right or wrong. And so for years, our culture basically embraced that. But then our culture began to evolve out of that and into another type of culture. Another type of culture is called heteronomous. And that simply means another law, or the culture where you're dictated what you can believe by the leadership of that culture. For example, a lot of your Muslim countries make it clear as to how you can dress, what you can drive, if you can drive at all, who you can associate with, what can you believe, what you cannot believe. They will let you know that if you are caught with a New Testament, you'll be put to death or whatever. And so the culture, that kind of culture is not the kind of culture we have in our world. If you were to ask, what kind of culture we live in what is called an autonomous culture, meaning this: we have the moral prerogative to believe what we want, and no one gets to tell us what to believe. No one gets to force us what to believe. We have this moral prerogative where we get to believe what we want. But here's the problem with that type of culture, though. The moment I disagree with you, and I become punitive or accusatory or condemning, I have now just switched into a heteronomous culture, meaning I get to dictate to you what you have to believe. And that's the problem of this culture that we're living in. It's never consistent, because the moment I say to you, if you do not believe like I believe, then I will accuse you, I will condemn you, I will say that you're hateful, I will not tolerate you, I will say that you're a bad person because you don't believe like me. The moment we do that in either direction, we have just become a heteronomous culture where, again, we're dictated from top to bottom what it is we can believe, not believe, or embrace. And there lies the problem in our culture today, that so many people are saying, if you do not believe like I believe, if you do not think like I think, if you do not embrace what I embrace, if you do not embrace who I am and everything about me, then I will accuse you, I will condemn you, I will punish you, I will say nasty things about you. And this is the problem that this dad's running into, that his children are now saying he's a hateful person. And all he's saying is, I disagree with what your friends are saying. I disagree with perhaps what you're saying. Because for many in the church, and this is the problem, for many in the church, I will argue marriage is sacred. And we have forgotten that reality, that marriage is sacred, that sexuality is sacred. And so believing that and holding that is important. So this biblical sacredness is important, and the thought of departing from that for a lot of people is unacceptable. Doesn't mean they hate. It just simply says the thought of one departing from what they believe about the Bible is unacceptable to them. And so the reality is this: God gives us the prerogative to choose, but God does not give us the choice of what the outcome will be.
Say that again.
God gives us the prerogative to choose. You can choose to believe or not believe. You can choose, whatever form of sexuality you desire. You have that prerogative. But God doesn't give us the choice of what the outcome will be. In other words, consequences are always bound to our choices. Consequences are always bound to our choices. As one person used to say, choose your behavior, you choose your consequence. So here's the point of what this dad's trying to say. Any departure from what God is saying about marriage can and will cause problems. That's what he's saying. And he's concerned about that. Doesn't mean he hates. He's just simply concerned that any departure from what God says about marriage can and will cause problems. But again, with that being said, we still have the responsibility to love those who disagree with us and to recognize that only God can change the heart, and that we still have the ability and the reality and the opportunity to love one another as Christ has loved us. And the Word of God makes it clear that even while we were in our sins, Christ died for us. And we need to be mindful of that. So again, we need to recognize what culture we live in. We need to recognize how easily it is for us to be just as punitive or condemning to someone as we think there are of us. And to get to the point to where we realize, you know what? I'm going to have to recognize these are my beliefs or my choices. Those are his beliefs or her beliefs and her choices. And I have to respect them, even though I don't have to agree with them.
Right. And, you said at the very beginning of this question that we can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that goes back to what you just quoted of Jesus' words that we should love one another, and following his example that he sacrificed for us.
And look, we've all, I like to say, in the church have struggled in this area. But once we start putting our arms around people that don't love us, or once we start, loving those who don't love us, then that's when we look most like Jesus. And that's, again, what this season's all about. That's what, again, we're called to do as Christians.
And there you have it from the Family Answer Man, ladies and gentlemen, that we would love like Jesus, which is what this season is all about. We want to thank today our incredible underwriters, Winners Air and Days Smokehouse, for underwriting today's show. And as a reminder, this is not a full therapy session. This is a 30-minute time that we have to give advice that hopefully will help you and inspire you, but this is not specific advice to your situation. So if you would like to seek more in-depth answers, we encourage you to do that. We hope that this episode of the Family Answer Man will encourage you and inspire you to make changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family.